Welcome back to Real Life Documentary, a channel that tells you real life stories and happenings. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. Now on today's episode of the Real Life Documentary. In the peaceful town of Pine Hill, the shocking murder of Jennifer Johnson disrupted the seemingly tranquil community. What appeared to be a close-knit suburban haven was torn apart by a crime fueled by passion and betrayal, exposing the hidden darkness in the lives of two couples, Daniel and Linda Garner, and Mark and Jennifer Johnson. Daniel Garner, a well-regarded architect with a charismatic personality, was married to Linda, a dedicated schoolteacher. Mark Johnson, a successful financial advisor, and his wife Jennifer were their closest friends. The two couples shared more than just social gatherings. They also engaged in a consensual wife-swapping arrangement, which initially added excitement to their lives. However, this unconventional lifestyle masked underlying tensions. Daniel became increasingly infatuated with Jennifer, and his feelings for her grew into a dangerous obsession. Linda, aware of her husband's deepening attraction to Jennifer, struggled silently. Meanwhile, Jennifer, sensing the growing intensity of Daniel's emotions, decided to end the arrangement, unaware of the fatal consequences her decision would trigger. Despite appearances of a stable 10-year marriage, Daniel's fixation on Jennifer would ultimately unravel their lives, leading to deceit, obsession, and a shocking murder. Linda, a third-grade teacher, was cherished by her students and respected by her colleagues. She and her husband, Daniel, lived in a lovely house on Maple Street, surrounded by a well-kept garden that Linda took great care of. 5 years prior, Mark and Jennifer Johnson had moved to Pine Hill and quickly formed a close friendship with the Garners. Mark, a financial advisor, was known for being outgoing and the life of the party, while Jennifer, with her captivating beauty and magnetic personality, was also well-liked in the community. Their arrival brought a new energy to the neighborhood, and the friendship between the two couples blossomed over shared interests and mutual admiration. The idea of wife-swapping was first introduced during a dinner party at the Garners' home. Fueled by wine and a sense of adventure, the conversation shifted to open relationships. To everyone's surprise, the idea was met with curiosity instead of shock. Over the following weeks, the couples discussed the concept more seriously, setting clear boundaries and rules to ensure their primary relationships remained intact. Their first experience was both awkward and exhilarating, with Daniel and Jennifer, and Mark and Linda, swapping partners for the night. The experience, though nerve-wracking, left them eager to continue, and what started as an occasional experiment soon became a regular part of their lives. The arrangement initially seemed to work well, adding a spark to both marriages. The couples appeared happier, more connected, and continued their social lives as usual, often hosting parties and taking vacations together. Their secret lifestyle was carefully guarded, only discussed in the privacy of their homes or during private gatherings. For a time, the novelty of the arrangement brought a sense of excitement, and it seemed like they had found a perfect balance. As the months went by, subtle changes in Daniel's behavior began to emerge, particularly in his interactions with Jennifer. He started showing an unusual interest in her, often finding excuses to spend time alone with her. Linda noticed his increasing preoccupation but chose to overlook it, hoping it was just a passing phase. Mark, too, remained unaware of the growing tension. What the others didn't realize was that Daniel's fascination with Jennifer had grown into something more serious and troubling. He couldn't stop thinking about her, constantly replaying their encounters in his mind and yearning for more time with her. What had once been a harmless adventure was gradually turning into an obsession that would lead to devastating consequences for everyone involved. Daniel's infatuation had become all-consuming. His thoughts were dominated by Jennifer, distracting him even during work meetings and family gatherings. The architectural projects he had once been passionate about now seemed insignificant compared to his desire for her. He began looking for ways to be closer to her, offering to help with tasks Mark would usually handle, or inviting the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda started noticing the shift in her husband. At first, she thought it was simply due to the excitement of their new lifestyle. But it soon became evident that Daniel's interest in Jennifer had crossed the boundaries they had agreed upon. He grew irritable and distant when they weren't with the Johnsons, and his conversations often revolved around Jennifer, her likes, her quirks, and her habits. One evening after a dinner party, Linda decided to confront Daniel while cleaning up. His response was defensive, dismissing her concerns as nothing more than jealousy. Linda, not wanting to disrupt the delicate balance they had established, chose to let the issue go for the time being but kept a closer eye on Daniel. Her suspicions grew stronger as she noticed him staring at Jennifer during gatherings, his gaze lingering longer than it should. Jennifer also began to sense Daniel's growing obsession. At first, she was flattered by the attention, but it soon became uncomfortable. His touches grew more possessive, and his words took on an intimate tone that went beyond what was appropriate. Jennifer confided in Mark about her discomfort, but he brushed it off, believing Daniel was just more expressive with his affections. Mark's casual attitude left Jennifer feeling isolated and unsure of how to handle the situation. The turning point came during a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin, where the couples had planned to relax and reconnect. However, the getaway only served to expose Daniel's deepening fixation. He monopolized Jennifer's time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone and leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension between them was obvious, and Jennifer's attempts to distance herself from Daniel were met with subtle but persistent resistance. One evening while sitting by the fire, Daniel made a remark that crossed the line. He spoke about leaving everything behind and starting a new life together, just the two of them. Jennifer, shocked and unsettled, quickly excused herself and went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Daniel again. This time, he was less dismissive but still refused to fully acknowledge the intensity of his feelings for Jennifer. Linda's frustration grew as she realized the depth of Daniel's obsession. She loved her husband, but it was becoming increasingly clear that his infatuation with Jennifer was threatening to destroy their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic, pushing their lives further into turmoil. Daniel's behavior grew more alarming as he began following Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings, showing up at her yoga classes and even appearing at her workplace under the pretense of casual visits. What started as unease for Jennifer quickly turned into fear. She confided in a close friend, who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to regain control, Jennifer decided to end the arrangement altogether, hoping that by doing so, Daniel would come to his senses and they could all move on without further damage. One evening, while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel unexpectedly showed up at the Johnsons' house. Jennifer, caught off guard, let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air heavy with tension. Daniel confessed his deep feelings for her, speaking about a future where they could be together openly. Horrified, Jennifer tried to reason with him, explaining that their arrangement had only ever been meant as a temporary thrill. As Daniel's declarations became more intense, Jennifer's fear shifted to anger. She realized she needed to end this before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. Firmly, Jennifer told Daniel that their arrangement was over, and he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Daniel, visibly shaken, attempted to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. In the following days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he would eventually come to terms with the situation. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart. Linda knew that Daniel's obsession had gone too far, and while she wanted to support Jennifer, she felt torn by a sense of twisted loyalty to her husband. She promised Jennifer she would talk to Daniel, hoping to diffuse the growing tension. However, instead of subsiding, Daniel's obsession only deepened. Daniel's behavior escalated further as he began waiting for Jennifer after work and leaving her messages professing his undying love. Feeling increasingly unsafe, Jennifer decided to confront him one final time, hoping to make him understand the seriousness of his actions. They met in a secluded park, away from any onlookers. Jennifer once again reiterated that their arrangement was over, and his behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go and move on with his life. Unable to accept her rejection, Daniel grew desperate, accusing Jennifer of leading him on and toying with his emotions. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted that they both return to their marriages and end things completely. Unbeknownst to them, Linda had secretly followed Daniel to the park. Watching from a distance, her heart raced as she saw the confrontation unfold. She could see the anguish on Daniel's face and the resolve in Jennifer's. Linda had known this confrontation was inevitable, but she feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation morphed into anger. Jennifer's rejection felt like a deep betrayal, and he began verbally lashing out, calling her names and accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, holding back tears, refused to be intimidated and stood her ground. Linda, still hidden in the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things spiraled further out of control. Stepping out of her hiding place, her voice shaking, she called out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to pull Daniel out of his rage, and he turned to her, his expression a mixture of confusion and relief. Jennifer, seizing the moment, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Now alone with her husband, Linda tried to calm him down, reassuring him that they would find a way to move past this. But deep inside, she knew their lives had been irreversibly altered. The affair had reached a breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had triggered a chain of events that could not be undone. As the dust settled, the full extent of Daniel's obsession and Linda's complicity would soon come to light, leading to a tragic and violent conclusion. The confrontation at the park had left Daniel in turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection, coupled with Linda's unexpected appearance, had shaken him deeply. That night, he returned home overwhelmed by feelings of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda, sensing the inner storm brewing within him, tried to soothe his troubled thoughts, but Daniel was inconsolable. Over the following days, Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic. He swung between intense anger and deep sadness, unable to process Jennifer's rejection or the injustices he felt he had endured. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over what had happened and replaying Jennifer's rejection in his mind. Linda, powerless to help, grew frustrated and fearful, sensing that something was about to break, though she wasn't prepared for how drastic things would soon become. Jennifer, meanwhile, was determined to move on. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her marriage to Mark. She hadn't revealed the full extent of Daniel's obsession to her husband, afraid of how he might react and the fallout it could cause. Jennifer hoped that by cutting ties completely, Daniel would eventually accept the end of their arrangement and leave her alone. One evening, as Jennifer returned home from work, she was met with a sight she had been dreading: Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart sank, and she braced herself for yet another confrontation. Approaching him cautiously, her voice steady but firm, she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes filled with desperation, pleaded for one last chance to explain himself. Jennifer, sensing that talking to Daniel was futile, tried to walk past him, but he grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. She could see the madness in his eyes. Struggling to break free, her voice grew louder as she demanded that he let go. A nearby neighbor, alerted by the commotion, stepped outside to see what was happening. Realizing they were being watched, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Shaken and frightened, Jennifer thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. Once inside, Jennifer immediately called Linda, hoping for a way to resolve the situation without involving the police. Hearing the fear in Jennifer's voice, Linda agreed to meet her the next day to discuss how to handle Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The following day, they met at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, recounted her encounter with Daniel and her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to figure out a solution. She promised Jennifer that she would speak to Daniel and help him understand that their relationship was truly over. When Linda returned home, she found Daniel agitated and on edge. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mixture of anger and concern. Feeling cornered, Daniel lashed out, accusing Linda of siding with Jennifer and betraying him. The argument escalated and Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts grew darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him, and that his wife seemed to be against him. In his twisted mind, he believed the only way to end his pain was to eliminate its source. He convinced himself that if he couldn't have Jennifer, no one else would. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house, knowing Mark was out of town and Jennifer was alone. He broke in through a side window and silently crept to the bedroom, where Jennifer lay sleeping. The sight of her, peaceful and unaware, ignited a storm of rage and desperation within him. He grabbed a kitchen knife and approached her, his mind a chaotic mix of love and hatred. Jennifer awoke to see Daniel standing over her, the knife gleaming in the dim light. She tried to scream, but Daniel quickly covered her mouth, his grip unyielding. In a fit of rage, he plunged the knife into her chest, silencing her forever. As Jennifer's life slipped away, Daniel stood over her, his mind a haze of conflicting emotions. After committing the murder, Daniel fled the scene, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. He returned home where Linda found him trembling and incoherent, the weight of his actions crushing down on him. Linda immediately realized what Daniel had done, and in a moment of twisted loyalty, she decided to help him cover up the crime. Their life, the secrets they had kept, were all at stake, and she knew that if they were to survive this, they needed to act quickly and decisively. Driven by a warped sense of duty and self-preservation, Linda quickly took control of the situation. She led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his bloodied clothes and wash off the evidence. Her mind raced as she understood the urgency of the situation. They needed to eliminate all traces of the crime and protect their hidden lives. As Daniel stood under the hot shower, watching the water turn pink around his feet, Linda gathered his clothes and placed them in a plastic bag. She meticulously scrubbed the floors, ensuring that no blood remained. Once Daniel was cleaned up, she sat him down and forced him to recount every detail of what had happened. Though shaken, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice trembling under the weight of his actions. Linda formulated a plan. They needed an alibi and to dispose of any evidence. She called a trusted friend, lying that Daniel had been with her the entire evening, securing their alibi. Then she drove to a secluded area outside of town, where she burned Daniel's blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon, praying the fire would erase all evidence. When the police began questioning everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners, Linda's well-crafted alibi held up under scrutiny. Although Daniel was visibly distressed, he managed not to raise suspicion. The investigation soon stalled, with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners, and for the moment, they seemed to have evaded the authorities. However, despite their initial success in escaping detection, the weight of what they had done would soon bear down on them in ways they couldn't foresee. The psychological toll of the murder weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He withdrew from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Meanwhile, Linda, while outwardly composed, felt the strain of their secret pressing down on her. She became hypervigilant, scrutinizing every interaction for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks following Jennifer's murder were a blur of tension and deception for the Garners. Linda took on the role of the stabilizer, managing Daniel's paranoia while ensuring their public facade remained intact. She monitored the news for updates on the investigation, feeling relieved that the police seemed to have no solid leads. However, Linda understood that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to create a narrative that would divert attention away from Daniel. She suggested that Daniel should appear more distraught over Jennifer's death, aligning with the community's grief to throw off any suspicion. At social gatherings and community meetings, Daniel played the part of the grieving friend. He spoke of Jennifer with a mix of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mark, devastated and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Daniel's empathy, never suspecting his friend's involvement in his wife's death. As the days passed, Daniel's mental state deteriorated further. His guilt manifested in nightmares and hallucinations, tormenting him day and night. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in alcohol but finding only temporary escape. Linda, fearing that he might confess in a drunken stupor, kept a close eye on him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house or make any rash decisions that could unravel their carefully constructed web of lies. Despite their efforts to maintain normalcy, the weight of their actions loomed over them, threatening to expose the dark truth behind their seemingly perfect lives. One evening, as Daniel sat slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down, confessing to Linda that he couldn't live with the guilt any longer, and that he needed to come clean. Panic surged through Linda as she tried to calm him down, fearing the collapse of everything they had worked to conceal. In a desperate attempt to help him regain some composure, She suggested they take a short trip out of town. They traveled to a secluded cabin in the mountains, hoping the change of scenery would provide Daniel with some semblance of peace. The isolation offered a temporary respite, allowing them to plan their next steps without the constant pressure of the investigation looming over them. During their time at the cabin, Linda reinforced the importance of their secrecy. She coached Daniel on how to handle police questioning and public interactions, drilling him until he could respond without hesitation. Linda's determination to protect their lifestyle and avoid imprisonment fueled her relentless drive to keep their story straight. She knew that any slip-up could unravel the delicate balance they had established. Upon returning to Pin Hill, the Garners resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel, though still haunted by his actions, managed to present a more stable front. Linda continued to manage their interactions with the community, ensuring they remained above suspicion. However, the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Daniel's increased drinking and erratic behavior. Whispers of his possible involvement in Jennifer's death began to circulate. Linda, ever vigilant, worked tirelessly to quash the rumors, but she knew their time was running out. As the police investigation continued, new evidence came to light, pointing towards inconsistencies in Daniel's alibi, tightening the noose around them. With each passing day, the weight of their secret grew heavier, threatening to crush the fragile life they had built. Linda and Daniel found themselves at a crossroads, forced to confront the reality of their choices and the inevitable consequences that would follow. The Garners' carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse, and the truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. Detective Mitchell interviewed the Garners separately, meticulously noting any discrepancies in their stories. While Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, Daniel's emotional state seemed consistent with that of a grieving friend. However, Mitchell's instincts told her there was more to the story. As the weeks passed, new evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Jennifer's phone records revealed a series of increasingly desperate text messages from Daniel, indicating his obsession with her. Detective Mitchell brought Daniel in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi and the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, stuck to the story Linda had coached him on, but his nervousness and evasive answers only heightened the detective's suspicions. The turning point came when a neighbor came forward with crucial information. They had seen Daniel's car parked near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder, and remembered the strange behavior he had exhibited. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence in Daniel's erratic behavior, was enough for the police to obtain a search warrant for the Garners' home. During the search, the police found remnants of the burned clothing and traces of blood that had seeped into the floorboards, despite Linda's thorough cleaning. This damning evidence, coupled with the witness testimony and phone records, painted a clear picture of Daniel's guilt. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda realized that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. In the face of overwhelming evidence, panic gripped Linda. She understood that their lies had caught up with them, and the consequences of their actions were about to be laid bare. Desperation began to set in as she weighed her options, whether to continue protecting Daniel or to save herself. As the walls closed in, the couple was faced with the reality that their lives would never be the same again, and the truth would soon be revealed. She knew that their only chance of escaping a lengthy prison sentence was to come up with a new plan, one that would shift the blame away from them and onto someone else. As the police closed in, Linda and Daniel faced the harsh reality of their situation. The lies and deceit that had once protected them were now threatening to unravel completely, and the truth was about to be revealed in a way they could never have anticipated. As the evidence against Daniel mounted, Detective Mitchell prepared to make her move. She brought Daniel in for another round of questioning, this time with a different approach. She laid out all the evidence they had gathered: the phone records, the witness testimonies, and the forensic findings. Cornered and overwhelmed, Daniel began to crack under the pressure. Mitchell pressed harder, suggesting that if Daniel came clean, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Unable to handle the weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, Daniel finally broke down. He confessed to killing Jennifer, describing his obsession, the confrontation, and the moment he lost control. However, in his confession, Daniel also implicated Linda, revealing her role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and craft an alibi. Sensing the opportunity to get the full story, Mitchell had Linda brought in for questioning as well. Confronted with Daniel's confession, Linda initially denied any involvement. But as Mitchell detailed the evidence corroborating Daniel's account, Linda realized there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. She admitted to helping Daniel, explaining that she had done it out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of losing everything they had built together. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated Pine Hill and the surrounding region. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers eager to see the conclusion of the tragic tale. Daniel was charged with first-degree murder, while Linda was charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. Both pleaded guilty to their respective charges. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda, despite her role in the cover-up, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and her previously clean record. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. Mark Johnson, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in the justice served but continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife. The community of Pine Hill, once vibrant and close-knit, struggled to heal from the scars left by the tragic events, a haunting reminder of how quickly trust can turn into betrayal and love into obsession.